We are now halfway through 2024, and I thought it would be fun to go through and give out some awards through the first 6 months of the year. But these are not going to be your average awards. The fighter of the year, the pay-per-view of the year, that shit's just too obvious. Okay, we got to keep this fresh, and we got to give some opinions here. So these aren't going to be your regular type of awards. Some of them may be a little bit controversial. Some of them may get under your skin, but nothing that I'm saying is anything too crazy because I have some evidence to back it up. We'll start it off. The Can't Be Beat Award of the Year may not be a hot take. I don't think it is, because at this point, I think we can all agree Alex Pereira looks like he can't be beat at 205 pounds. Like, we're really talking about this dude moving up to heavyweight to fight one of the champs, because he's pretty much cleaned out a division at light heavyweight. Now, you could say he hasn't fought Ankalaev yet, but who has Ankalaev fought? Ankalaev's last win was Johnny Walker, and Johnny Walker gets knocked out by everybody. So it's not really like Ankalaev at this point is really undeniable to where he could get a title shot and everyone would be like, yes, he absolutely needs it. And in the meantime, Alex Pereira in 2024 has knocked out Jamal Hill in round 1 and then knocked out Yuri Prochazka in round 2. And the biggest thing about that is, number one, knocking out Jamal Hill in round 1, something that nobody's ever done. Nobody's ever truly knocked out Jamal Hill. He made it look easy, like flawless, barely even took any damage in that fight, just picked him apart within 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. And then he takes the fight on short notice against Yuri Prochazka. And I can't be the only one that was thinking this, but I'm like, short notice, Yuri's dangerous. Like, this is going to be, I said it would be the most impressive win of his career if he was to go out there and knock out Yuri Prochazka because of the short notice, because Yuri is so dangerous. And he went out there and looked flawless again. So at this point, I think he can't be beat at 205. Like, the only way that somebody could beat Alex Pereira is to out-grapple him. How many people go in there at 205 and they're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to grapple you for 5 rounds? Not many. I mean, Ankalaev had to resort to that against Jan Blachowicz in those later rounds, because in the first 2-3 rounds, he was getting his legs kicked off. He was getting outstruck on the feet by Jan Blachowicz. Now, Jan Blachowicz isn't a bad fighter, but if that's Alex Pereira in those first few rounds, he's knocking Ankalaev out. So, sure, Ankalaev could go with a grappling-heavy game plan, but for one, he's got to get that fight. I don't know if the UFC wants to make that fight. Maybe they do, because he's, got the Dagestani market. But I just don't see how Alex Pereira loses at 205. And everyone now wants him to move up a weight class. Why? Because they don't think there's anybody worthy of getting in the cage with him at this point at light heavyweight. He's at the point halfway through 2024 where it looks like he cannot be beat, and he absolutely deserves this award. Obviously, he's the fighter of the year at this point. 2 title defenses on 2 of the biggest cards, 2 flawless performances. Like, he is the guy right now. I don't think he can be beat at 205. Move on. We got a fraud check. Fraud check of the year so far, to me, is Robelis Despain. Now, the reason I say that is because, number one, he had a, 18-second knockout earlier in the year. And me and a lot of other people were looking at him like, all right, heavyweight division's pretty trash, right? Pretty trash. You could beat most of these unranked heavyweights pretty easily if you're any type of good. Like, if you're good at anything, you could blow through these unranked heavyweights, find your way into the rankings pretty easily. And then maybe you get fraud checked by one of these top 10 guys. Not the case with Robelis Despain. Okay, he gets the 18-second knockout against Josh Parisian, who's absolute trash. And then he fights Waldo Cortez Acosta, who wasn't even ranked, really didn't have any good wins in the UFC, and he lost 30-27. You would think a guy whose profession is mixed martial arts cage fighting would have some type of takedown defense, some type of get-up game. No. And even if when the fight was on the feet, in that fight, he didn't even look that good. So we were looking at this 6'7" Cuban, like, holy shit, this dude could be a real contender because if he touches you, it's night-night. He's got that Ngannou-type power. And then he loses to an unranked heavyweight. And I was going to put Shamil Gaziev on this spot as the fraud check, but I got to cut Shamil Gaziev some slack because he fought Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who's, a top 10 heavyweight in the world for, the past 4 or 5 years. Like, he's been around the block. He's a veteran. He's proven. And it was a 5-round main event. And he lost and he looked terrible. But in this case, it's Robelis Despain who's fighting an unranked Waldo Cortez Acosta, and he got 30-27. So I have to give it to Robelis Despain because he had all the hype, and then he got absolutely fraud checked, and he looked terrible. Where do you go from here? Because if you can't stuff a takedown and you can't get back up to your feet, you're not going to go that far. And in the heavyweight division, it really don't take that much to crack into the rankings, and he couldn't even do that. So he is the fraud check of the year so far in 2024. The I'm him moment of 2024 undoubtedly is Max Holloway. Okay, that fight for one, he goes up a weight class to take on Justin Gaethje, who arguably should have gotten a title shot, but they wanted to make this BMF title fight, put it on UFC 300, stack the card, and Max Holloway is like, sure, I'm in. And at the same time, Max Holloway could have had a title shot against Topuria because Topuria just beat Volkanovski, and Topuria is the champ. Max Holloway's right there in line, the number one contender for the longest time. Don't care. I'm going to take this fight against Justin Gaethje up a weight class. And he schooled him. And then at the end, he gives one of these and then knocks him out cold. That is one of the biggest I'm him moments or performances I can remember. That's undoubtedly the I'm him moment of 2024 so far. I don't think anyone's going to beat that. Okay, this might be around for a long time because Max Holloway that night was him. And he's him moving forward. And we will talk about him later in this video as well. Undoubtedly, I'm him. The UFC Baby. So every year we get one of these prospects that just break out with one type of performance. And at that point, the UFC is like, okay, we got to rally behind this guy. We got to start giving him some highlight knockouts. Like, we got to give him some easier opponents to where he can just rack up some highlights and, big performances that we can post on our socials. We can make him marketable. And they put him against Cameron Simon. And Cameron Simon was a good prospect as well and still is. So they basically matched Peyton Talbot up, who was 1-0 in the UFC, who had beaten a can, against Cameron Simon. And they're like, all right, who are we going to push? And Peyton Talbot beat the brakes off of Cameron Simon. And they were like, okay, we got to get this guy on everyone's radar. Because for one, he has one of the most exciting fight styles in the UFC. I mean, he's just a pressure fighter, all action, all the time, hits hard, pushes a pace. He's never looking to get a takedown. And he's never looking to stall the fight. He's never looking to just stare at you and try to counter-strike. He is in your face the entire fight. People love that. What he did to Cameron Simon was disgusting, like borderline abuse. He goes out there again this past weekend at UFC 303. They line him up with a guy that, the UFC knows that he should beat Giannis Gamori. And then he goes ahead and knocks him out in 18 seconds. So the UFC baby so far in 2024 is Peyton Talbot. He is their guy. I mean, he's got an interesting personality. They literally just posted his knockout on Giannis Gamori, like in line with the knockout that Sean O'Malley had on Eddie Wineland. So they love this kid. This is their baby. No doubt about it. They want Peyton Talbot to do big things in the UFC. They believe he's marketable. I think he's marketable too. Obviously, his fight style is super marketable. You can't ask for anything better than his fight style. And number two, he's got like a little quirky type of personality. Like, he's a little weird, but he's not like he doesn't try too hard. Like, he's himself. He's himself, which is good because most fans can kind of see past it when guys don't act like themselves or they're trying too hard. It doesn't seem like Peyton Talbot does that, and I think the UFC recognizes that. He can be himself, and he can still sell because he has a great fight style, and his personality is different than a normal fighter. So Peyton Talbot, UFC baby, all the way. Moving on, we got the title contender, and I put a little question mark next to that as well because every year we get one of these guys where they have a couple big performances earlier in the year or throughout the year, and maybe they were in the UFC for a good amount of time, and they were just kind of getting by, and they had wins. You know, they were good fighters, but they weren't really standing out. And then they just go off on this tear of big highlight finishes. And in this case, Michel Pereira moves up a weight class, and I know he got his first win in the middleweight division last year, but this year, what he's done in the UFC this year, he looks like he could be a title contender. Like at 185 pounds, it's not the deepest division. Not the deepest. Michel Pereira has been running through these dudes like it's nothing. Like he was a good fighter at welterweight, but ever since he's moved up to 185, he looks like that's his weight class. That's where he could be a real title challenger, a real contender. And what he's done in 2024, sub Michal Olszejczak within like a minute, like less than a minute. Hits him with like one body shot, jumps on his neck. Potieria, same fun style of fighting, backflips on him, gets up, gets the guillotine, and then just chokes him out cold, and he's like convulsing on the ground. So Michel Pereira looks like he could be a real title contender. He has a really fun fight style as well. And ever since he's moved up to middleweight, he looks like he could be moving up the rankings pretty quick. And the fact that he's had 2 fights through 2024 is a big thing as well because he's got 6 months left. Maybe he gets another 2 wins. Maybe he picks up 4 wins in 2024 and finds himself, in the top 5. So he's a real guy. He's a real guy, and he looks great at 185. I believe he deserves to be the title contender question mark through the first 6 months of 2024. All right, the worst card. We think about like the best card. What's the best card of 2024? Well, obviously it was UFC 300 because it was stacked. I mean, everyone's going to say that, right? At least if you have a brain, you should say that. UFC 300 was undoubtedly the best card of the year. But what was the worst card? The worst card of the year was Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira. At the Apex, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Get these Apex cards and they're just, they're terrible. They're terrible. And sometimes you have this little hope where you're like, all right, maybe it overperforms. We don't have the name value, but maybe these guys just go in there and leave it all out there. Not the case on this card. This card was absolutely terrible. Okay, so main event, Tatsuro Taira, Alex Perez, ended with an injury. It was a forced injury, and I would just say it was a little anticlimactic. The main event was okay. But the rest of the card was pretty trash. Co-main event, Miles Johns, Douglas Silva de Andrade. Terrible fight. Literally just stared at each other. Lucas Almeida, Timmy Kwamba. Almeida looked good, but, Kwamba really wasn't there to fight. He was there to backpedal and get his face beaten in. Stan Armfield was a pretty solid fight. Probably one of the better fights on the card. Almabayev Johnson, just grappling all the time. Not really much was happening. Fugit Quinlan was terrible. They would throw one punch at a time and just reset. Absolutely awful fight. Nate Maness, Jimmy Flick, awful fight. Maness was literally just jabbing him the entire fight. It's Jimmy Flick, bro. Jimmy Flick cannot strike. I think you could throw a right hand out there maybe instead of just flicking a jab out there. Fernandez Judas was a good fight, but it was a women's fight, and it wasn't really like, holy shit, she cracked her with a big shot. It wasn't like one of those. It was a good women's fight. And I was impressed with both girls, but it was the fight of the night, man. It was the fight of the night. It was a women's prelim. So that tells you everything you need to know about the card. And honestly, the highlight of the night was Weston Wilson, man, getting that submission in the first round Good for him. I mean, and then the Melky Costa Nurdenbeke fight was trash. It was literally just Nurdenbeke laying on him for the first 2 rounds and then gassing out, and Costa got the sub. That fight was awful, and then the Knudsen Palastri fight really wasn't that great either. So this is the worst card through 6 months of 2024, undoubtedly. The y'all must have forgot moment. Great moment. Great moment. The y'all must have forgot moment is Dustin Poirier knocking out Benoit Saint-Denis, bro. Like, after he got knocked out by Gaethje last year, and he comes into this fight, he takes this fight against Benoit, who was, what was he, like 9 spots lower in the rankings? I think Poirier was like number 4, and BSD was number 11 or 13. I can't remember. But he was way back in the rankings. No reason that he needed to take this fight. And he was an underdog. And not even like a slight underdog. He was like plus 180, plus 190 underdog to Benoit Saint-Denis. And Benoit looked to be like the killer moving up the rankings. I think they actually had the title bout signed with Benoit and Islam to fight in June, which is crazy. And then Dustin Poirier hits us with the y'all must have forgot moment of 2024 so far. Gets taken down. He's jumping gillies, but he's getting taken down. He's getting kind of beat up. Like, Benoit was beating him up. And then Benoit started to slow down a little bit, gets a little sloppy, and then bang, left hand sits him down, the right hook puts him to sleep. The y'all must have forgot moment of the year. These are some of the greatest moments that you remember of Dustin Poirier, of these guys that we're talking about. The Max Holloway, I'm him moment. This is a y'all must have forgot moment from Dustin Poirier that we will always remember. Him knocking out Benoit Saint-Denis to, number one, get his chance at the title again, which he lost, but it was still the y'all must have forgot moment of the year, undoubtedly. The beatdown of the year, Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. This is the beatdown of the year. Why? I believe it's because, yes, Sean O'Malley is really, really good, but at the same time, I also think that Chito Vera just loves getting hit. He just loves it, man. And I don't know how he's able to take these shots that he does. Like, the guy's never been knocked out, which is insane. Never been submitted either. Never been finished. But Sean O'Malley put an absolute beatdown on him. Almost tripled him up on significant strikes. Almost tripled him up on significant strikes. So Chito's not really landing much, and Sean's landing everything. Like, Chito's literally just there to be hit. And he took a 5-round beating. And that knee that he took, and if you're a UFC fan, you've probably heard the sound of that knee. Didn't knock him down, but I'm sure that shit hurt. And then, towards the end of the fight, he finally lands like a body shot. He's like, oh, I would have had you. Nah, dude, you got your ass whooped for 5 rounds. It was the beatdown of 2024 through 6 months. And it might end up being the beatdown of the year throughout the next 6 months. Like, it was that bad. I was there live in attendance, and I thought, dude, he's just whooping his ass. Like, just straight up whooping his ass. This is a title fight. Now, I will say this. Chito did not deserve to be in that title fight, but he was there. This is a world title fight. This should be competitive, right? Like, Sean O'Malley, great fighter. But the bantamweight division is super good. Super good. The gap between skill in the bantamweight division between Sean O'Malley and the next guy and the next guy and the next guy isn't that big. But Chito Vera made it look like Sean O'Malley's up here and Chito was below the screen, bro. Like, he got whooped. That is the beatdown through the first 6 months of 2024. The biggest fall off. Now, this is a little interesting because the biggest fall off comes from a guy that hasn't even fought in the year. And I wanted to put Volkanovski here, but you have to take into account, number one, he lost to Topuria. Topuria hasn't lost ever. And then he lost to Islam, which was the year prior. But at this point, it looks like Volkanovski. The future don't look bright for Volkanovski. But you have to take into account, who he fought. Khamzat Chimaev, I think, is having one of the biggest fall-offs through the first 6 months of 2024. Why? Because, number one, he can't get a fight. He can't make it to a fight. And if you're not fighting, then you're not relevant. If you're not fighting, you're not relevant. And he had a main event lined up with Robert Whittaker at UFC Saudi Arabia, one of the best fight nights of the year. Going to be on ABC. Massive, massive card. The UFC wants to impress Saudi like nobody else. They're selling out to Saudi. They need Khamzat there. They need that star power there. And he couldn't make it due to health issues. What are these health issues? This isn't a first thing. This isn't a first-time thing. Like, we've seen this before. We got to figure out your health. So, number one, you pulling out of one of the biggest fight nights of the year in a main event, that's going to hurt. He also hasn't fought before that in the first 6 months of 2024. And then number two, he hits us with the old crypto pump and dump. Now, this is very recent. So maybe it's a little bit recency bias. But if you're going to if you're going to pull out of a fight and then go on Twitter and hit us with a little crypto pump and dump, that's a really bad look. That's a really bad look because who follows you? Your fans. And then you throw out this smash coin and your fans are the ones buying it, and then it gets dumped. Yeah, that's going to make them not like you, bro. And that's going to force a pretty big fall off. So number one, he's not fighting and had to pull out one of the biggest fight nights of the year. Number two, hits us with a crypto pump and dump. Yeah, I think Khamzat just deserves to be the biggest fall off of 2024 through the first 6 months. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't think so. All right, the biggest fight to make. We got a couple more. The biggest fight to make through the first 6 months of 2024 is, in my opinion, Topuria versus Holloway. And a lot of that has to do with what happened in 2024. Topuria becoming the champ, knocking out Volkanovski. So right there, now that Volkanovski is out of the picture, a guy that's beat Holloway 3 times, he's out of the picture. Max Holloway's still doing his thing. He's the number one contender, really, in the featherweight division for the longest time. Just couldn't beat Volk. So right there, that alone makes for a big fight. Holloway versus Topuria. Finally, Max Holloway, this fan favorite everybody loves, finally going to get to fight somebody else other than Volk for the featherweight title to get back to being the champ. And then you add what Holloway did against Justin Gaethje. That just makes it even bigger. Because you look at Topuria, how he did Volkanovski was crazy. Just crazy. Composed, knocks him out in round 2 like it was nothing. And maybe you're thinking, all right, Topuria looks like he's on another level. I don't know that Holloway would do as good as he's done to these other guys in the featherweight division. But then he goes out and does that to Justin Gaethje, up a weight class, just pieces him apart throughout the entire fight, and then knocks him out with 1 second left. Becomes one of the most viral knockouts of all time. And then you're like, holy shit. Max Holloway is still fairly young. He's still fairly young in his career. He just knocked out a dude up a weight class in Gaethje who's super dangerous. One of the hardest punchers at 155. He could go back down to 145 and fight Ilia Topuria, and it would be a scrap. So I think this is the biggest fight to make through 2024, or through 6 months in 2024, because these two guys in a cage would just be crazy, bro. I hope they make it for the Sphere because that would be just insane. I mean, Topuria has literally never lost, and Holloway, he's all-time one of the greatest. It'd be huge. This is the biggest fight to make, undoubtedly. Lastly, we have the why is the UFC pushing this title fight? And every year, seems like almost every year, we get one of these title fights where the UFC is trying to push it, or they make a title fight that doesn't really make sense, and the UFC is just going to stand by it. Last year, to me, it was the Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington title fight in December, because, Bilal had just beaten Gilbert Burns, I think it was in May of 2023, and that was supposed to be, I think it was supposed to be the number one contenders fight or something like that. And they both took it on short notice. They both took a big risk, and Bilal wins, but Colby Covington gets the title shot. And Colby Covington hadn't fought since Jorge Masvidal in a very long time. So we were looking at that like, does Colby really deserve this? Probably not. Bilal probably deserves it, but we don't really like Bilal that much either, as far as his fight style goes. And most of the casuals were like, oh, Colby Covington, yes. Colby Covington. Oh, he's going to go in there and just maul Leon Edwards. Yeah. But, the real fight fans knew Colby didn't really deserve it. But the UFC knows Colby's going to sell. He's going to sell pay-per-views because he's going to talk all that shit. And, Leon Edwards isn't. And ultimately we did get Leon Edwards versus Bilal. But this year's, why is the UFC pushing this, is, of course, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And this fight through the 6 months of 2024 almost seems like it's just a burden. It just seems like it's a burden. And unless you're a Jon Jones meat rider, I don't see how you can look in this and be like, yeah, that's a fight that needs to happen, bro. Because we have nothing left in the heavyweight division. This is the fight we need to bring back the heavyweight division. No, it's not. But that's what Dana and the UFC is pushing. They're like, no, this fight needs to happen. Jon Jones has literally never lost. Literally never lost. Stipe is, the greatest heavyweight of all time. Well, he hasn't fought in like 4 years. So he's old. Jon's had one fight in the heavyweight division. We have an interim title champion in Tom Aspinall, who's defending his belt before Jon Jones is even defending his undisputed belt. Sure, he got injured, but why does this fight need to happen? Why is the UFC pushing this? I mean, I think a lot of people have really started to come to this conclusion that it's like, do we really need to see it? Like, what version is Stipe in? Like, Stipe really isn't in any type of light where we can, see how he looks, see how he's feeling, if he's training every day type of thing. And Jon, he just had the big injury last year. He hasn't fought in well over a year now. Like, we have a great heavyweight champion right now in Tom Aspinall. Why is this fight needed to be made when it's just holding up an entire division? It doesn't make sense to me. But, just like last year when Leon versus Colby was made, everyone was like, yeah, Colby doesn't really deserve it, but, it'll probably be a good fight, and it actually wasn't. It was a terrible fight. So maybe we see that here, but, if they do eventually announce this and it does happen, fans they're going to be about it. But right now, it's like it doesn't really need to happen. It doesn't. We have a great heavyweight champ, and he's defending his belt. He's staying active. He's defending his interim champ. So, it's crazy. It's crazy. But those are the awards through 6 months of UFC, or through 6 months of 2024. Appreciate y'all for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Till next time, Hey Job Picks. We out.